In this video, I'll be reviewing the SRAM Force 1 Road Group Set. Now Force sits just below SRAM's top of the line Road Group Set, which is red. So it goes red, Force, Rival, and then Apex. Now I'll be focusing specifically on the Force 1, which is a 1x11 system. To optimize their road group set for 1x system, SRAM has carried over some of their technologies from the mountain bike world, starting with the narrow wide chainring. So the narrow wide chainring has one tooth that's narrow, one tooth that is wide, and that holds the chain onto the cassette so that you don't need to have a chain guide. Now this bike actually came with a chain guide just for extra security, although it's not necessary. Also, SRAM uses a clutch rear derailleur, which they call cage lock, and that simply puts more tension on the derailleur cage. That further keeps the chain locked onto the front chainring. It also keeps it from bouncing around and causing chain slap on your rear chainstay. One thing that I really like about SRAM's cage lock is the fact that you can lock the derailleur cage forward, which makes it real easy to get the rear wheel off. Now I really think that SRAM's 1x system is the best group set that I've used for cyclocross racing. The greater tension on the derailleur cage really helps in cyclocross racing, like I said, to keep that chain from bouncing around as opposed to using a standard rear derailleur. Also in cyclocross racing, you're not using a huge gear range. Your speeds really aren't that high, so the run-by system really comes into play, but I'll go into those benefits more towards the end of the video. One unique feature that I really like about SRAM's road component group is the fact that you can adjust the reach of the brake lever and the shift lever independently. To adjust the reach of the paddle, there's a 2.5mm hex bolt right here, and then if you want to adjust the reach of the brake lever, there's a 2.5mm hex bolt kind of up inside that's pretty easy to get to. Now let's talk about the shifting performance of the group set. If you're used to Shimano and you're thinking about switching to SRAM, I actually made a video specifically on that subject. I won't go too much into that, but if you're interested in that subject, look below and I'll link the video so you can watch that one. Just a real quick overview of the way SRAM works is to go to a harder gear, you move the paddle in a short throw, so one little click over, and it's a very positive click. You know when you've made the gear change. And then to go to an easier gear or a bigger cog in the back, you're going to move that lever over a little bit further than you would throw it over to go to a harder gear. Now, again, if you're switching from Shimano to SRAM, it's very intuitive. It did not take me a very long time to get used to it. I'll just say that again. Go back and watch that video if you want, but it's a very intuitive system and one that you learn very quickly. One thing that I like about SRAM 2, similar to Shimano, is the fact that if you want to go to multiple easier gears, you can just throw the lever over further. So you can actually go 3 gears at a time if you're going from a hard gear to an easier gear. So you can go to bigger cogs in the back quickly. And being able to jump to multiple easier gears is something that I found extremely useful in cyclocross racing. The typical scenario is you're going pretty fast and then you have to make a sharp bend and do a steep climb and you want to jump down 3 gears quickly. And I use that feature, again, quite frequently in cyclocross racing and it works really well. The main downside to SRAM versus Shimano, again, I'm not going to go too much into SRAM versus Shimano, but this is the one thing, and I actually forgot to mention this in that video I made of switching from Shimano to SRAM, and that is the fact that if you are in the absolute easiest gear, the biggest cog in the back, and you don't really know it, you think maybe there's one more gear, and you try to throw the lever over a little bit more to go to an easier gear, you actually will go into a harder gear. So once it reaches the end, the lever, if you hit it, it will go back down to a smaller cog. So that's probably the main gripe that I have with SRAM. Although it's not something that I've really experienced a whole lot, it's there. By the way, this cassette is an 1136. You can actually get this system in a 1042. Now the 1042 uses a different hub interface. It's SRAM's XD drive, and so there is that option. But again, you have to get the different hub interface, so you couldn't just put that bigger cassette, that 1042, onto this hub. Now speaking of gear range, this bike also has a 40 tooth in the front, and I found that really good for gravel road riding and for cyclocross racing. I've been using this SRAM system for about 5 months. About 3 months of those was strictly gravel, and now I'm about halfway through a cyclocross race season. And so again, that gear range I've found really good for flatter terrain. I spin out maybe around 28, 29 miles an hour. Unlike mountain bike groups, with the road groups, you can't really decouple the shifting system from the braking system. So I'm going to review the brakes as well when I talk about the SRAM Force 1. Braking performance is really good on this system. I like the fact that when you squeeze the lever, the pad contact is very quick, so the levers don't come too close to the bars, and that's a problem that I have with some of the Shimano systems. With the SRAM, it's a really quick pad contact when you squeeze the lever. The power that I get from the braking system is what I would expect from a higher end hydraulic brake system, and it's excellent. I have never been needing more power in the brakes. Now, this is a cyclocross bike, and so the tires are thinner than a mountain bike tire, and so when I'm braking, I have plenty of power. I can lock up the wheels if I need to slide it around a corner, so no issues with power. Modulation is also excellent. I've used some of the older SRAM mountain bike brakes in the past, which I've not liked. Now, they've gotten a lot better. The new level and guide SRAM mountain bike brakes are good. The power and modulation is good, and no exception here with the SRAM Force. And what I mean by good modulation is the fact that you can really regulate the power. There's not that on-off feel that you get from some braking systems where when you squeeze the lever, it's an instant grab of the pads. You can do a little bit of braking force, a lot, which is really important for cyclocross racing, because if you're in terrain that's wet, muddy, slippery, you don't want to put too much power to the wheel and slide the wheel out. So really being able to regulate the power is important, and you can do that really well in this braking system. Now, the one issue that I've had with this braking system, and I haven't had it with the SRAM Eagle on my mountain bike, that uses the guide brakes. But on this system, I've had an issue with the pads contacting the rotors. I'll get them centered, I'll get them adjusted, and then a week or so later, the rotor is contacting the pads. Now, there is a very slight wobble in the rear rotor, and so that may be an issue. I will probably either try to straighten that rotor out a little bit or just get a new one. The front has tended to be okay. It's not perfect. Again, I'll get it adjusted well, and then it'll come out of adjustment. So I'm still working through that. So that's just kind of a note I wanted to make in this video. Also, if we're going to get nitpicky, I prefer the mineral oil of Shimano systems. With the DOT fluid that you have to use in the SRAM systems, you got to be real careful with the fluid that you don't get it on paint. So the mineral oil is just easier to work with. So what do I think of the 1x system versus a 2x? For cyclocross racing, hands down the system to go with. The great thing about 1x systems is the simplicity. There is no front derailleur to think about. So when you're riding or racing, it's much more of a mindless effort of not having to think about the front derailleur. There's also, with a front derailleur, that's where you can probably run into the most problems with the drivetrain. So if you're going to drop a chain, it's usually because you're shifting the front derailleur. At least that's been my experience. So the 1x system eliminates that. Also, there's the fact that it's a little bit lighter. You don't have a shifter that has to have a paddle for the front derailleur, which is one thing I really like about this SRAM system, the 1x system, is there is no paddle for the left shifter. And of course, you don't have a front derailleur, so it eliminates a little bit of weight by eliminating the front derailleur. Now, 1x systems are getting really popular on road bikes, cyclocross, gravel bikes. The one issue with 1x systems is the fact that you have a bigger jump between gears, especially that 10-42. So to go from a 10 in the back up to a 42, you've got to make some compromises in the steps that you have between gears. That's why for gravel riding, I lean more towards the 2x systems. Now this has been fine, but especially if you live in a flatter terrain, so you're having a more constant speed, sometimes it's hard to find the right gear. You're in a gear, like that gear's too big, and then you go to another, that one's too easy, and you go back, and it's just hard to find that perfect gear if you're holding a constant effort on flatter terrain. Now again, in cyclocross racing, your speed is varying all the time. For gravel, you could go either way. I mean, it's gonna be a matter of preference. My personal preference is I like 2x systems for gravel. Could I go with a 1x system and stick with it for gravel? Sure. But you're just going to make those compromises by jumping more between the gears. So that's going to wrap it up with my review of the SRAM Force 1. It is a group set that I really enjoy. I'm going to stick with it. Again, probably the best group set for cyclocross racing. It is definitely becoming popular. When I go to cyclocross races, I'm seeing more and more of Rival 1, Force 1, and that's one thing cool about SRAM is they're making the 1x systems in Apex, in Rival, in Force. It's a very popular group set for cyclocross racing, and you're starting to see it on more gravel bikes as well. So any questions or comments, leave them below. If you've used the system, let me know your thoughts, your experience on it. Thanks for watching.